Airshows used to give members of the public an unrestricted opportunity to get up close to the world of aviation. But now prices are soaring and airshows feel like they're more about industry deals than public excitement. I worry that if we keep pushing families away, we're actually cutting off the very pipeline that keeps aviation alive. So what is going on right now with airshows and what can we do to fix it? Now, I've never organised an airshow nor managed an airshow budget, but as a pilot with 20 years in the industry and as a lifetime airshow attendee, I've seen things change over the years. I'm not here to criticise any of the organisers, but I do want to highlight the perception of airshows right now and what we can do to change this trend. Because if we don't, to be honest, I am a little bit worried that it could potentially start to damage aviation in the long term. So let's start with cost. And my first concern is that I worry that the rising ticket prices for airshows is starting to make them less accessible for some families. I took a look at a ticket I bought for the Avalon Airshow back in 2010, and back then it cost me $60.55 for a one-day ticket. I adjusted that for inflation, and it should mean that the equivalent ticket now should cost $87. But general admission tickets for this year's Avalon Airshow are actually $98. That's more than $10 on top of inflation. If you want to park your car at Avalon, then on top of your ticket price, it's going to cost you $65 per day to park there. Now, I do appreciate that some of that is to disincentivize people bringing their cars to the airport, and I don't disagree with that because parking has been particularly difficult in the past with huge queues that meant it took a long time to get into the airshow. But the fact remains that some people do have to bring their cars into the airport in order to enjoy the airshow, and for them, they're going to have to pay another $65 on top for that privilege. There is a new option to park and ride, which I think again is great to relieve some of the traffic issues, and the cost of that isn't quite as much, but it's still another $35 on top of the ticket price. You can obviously use public transportation. There are free shuttle buses. Don't get me wrong, there are ways to do it to affordably get to and from the airshow, but they're not as convenient. If you have got a family, say you've got a couple of kids, quite a few bags, maybe a stroller, you want to bring some food along, it's sometimes not all that convenient to jump on crowded public transport to get to and from an airshow.
Airbus flight display, not sort of display how the passengers on board, putting speed into the flight.
Then there's the increased focus on corporate and trade attendees as opposed to the general public. You take the Farnborough Airshow in the UK, for example, that used to be a public airshow, but as the years have gone on, and especially recently, that's really been whittled down into what is basically now just a corporate and trade event with a small public day added on at the end. Now, admittedly, the Pioneers of Tomorrow Day, as it's called, does seem to have a lot of very good, engaging, interactive activities for kids. There is a flying display on that day as well, but it's a singular day, and if you can't get there on that day, you will miss out on the airshow if you don't have access to get to it on the other trade days. I have noticed in some of the airshows that I've been to recently, where there are trade days and public days, there are a lot more aircraft on the ground and in the air on the trade days than there were for the public. When I was at Farnborough last year as well, then you couldn't actually get anywhere near the aircraft, even on the trade days, unless you had an appointment. You certainly couldn't get inside any of them either. Of course, I understand the security concerns. I understand we don't want to damage these aircraft, but we used to do it. There used to be ways to allow families to go inside aircraft that they might not otherwise be able to ever afford to be inside. Being there at the air show and seeing these huge, interesting, exciting planes up close was the only opportunity that they would have. I just think it's not as exciting or inspiring for the youngsters out there when you pay a lot of money to go to these shows and you can't even get up close and inside the aircraft themselves.
The F-16 at the end of the runway shortly to go in about 20 seconds time, just being cleared up to the airspace.
But why does any of this matter? Why does my opinion about these airshows matter? Why should we be concerned that this is the way that airshows are going? At the end of the day, I mean, they're a business, let's be honest, and if they're making money for the people who have interests in those businesses, then what's wrong with that? My problem is that airshows should be the place where people have this rare opportunity to get really up close to the world of aviation. The excitement and spectacle of airshows creates these strong lifetime bonds between people and the world of aviation. For me, I probably wouldn't be in aviation. I wouldn't have studied to become a pilot if it wasn't for me being a 7-year-old kid sitting in a field at the Biggin Hill Air Show, watching the Red Arrows roar over the top of me, watching the RAF Vulcan thundering through the sky, being able to get up close and literally touch those aircraft, for me, was a hugely inspiring part of my youth. And that flame that was lit inside of me back then when I was 7 years old in a field in Biggin Hill, that flame's never gone out. And I just worry if we take away that accessibility to these really important aviation events, then we lose that initial connection between people and aviation. We've all read that we're facing things like a pilot shortage at the moment. Airlines are increasing their fleets, the number of flights per year is increasing, and there's an aging issue as well, as more pilots are retiring at the moment than are coming into the start of the system at the top of the funnel. The FAA released a report in 2023, and they concluded that the number of new pilots coming into the industry is not sufficient to offset the requirements based on the number of pilots that are retiring. But it's not just pilots, there's also a big shortage of aircraft engineers in the industry as well. Now, here in Australia in particular, some of that is to do with some of the certification and training requirements that have changed over the last 10 years. But nevertheless, the number of engineering licenses that have actually been issued in the last 10 years has halved. So airshows are a really critical part of this whole life cycle of aviation to create that initial spark in people and to get them pursuing a career in this industry.
Cet avion donc possède un atout unique pour les compagnies aériennes puisqu'il est aussi efficace et utilisable lorsqu'on fait un pari-bilan.
But what can we do to maybe change this and fix this potential problem down the line? Well, of course, we don't want to boycott the big air shows. If you're planning to go to any of the air shows that I've mentioned or other ones on the calendar, that's brilliant. That's great. If you can afford to go and take your family along, then please do that. We still need to support these as businesses because we don't want them themselves to fail. But let organisers know what you think about ticket pricing. If you think that it's making it not accessible for everybody to be able to enjoy the aviation experience, then use the contact forms and the feedback surveys that they send after these events to tell them. Encourage organisers to more evenly balance the trade versus public accessibility to the aircraft and to the flying displays. But outside of the big air shows, I think there's something that I would like to be a lot better at in the future, and I think as a community as a whole, we can all be better at this. And that's supporting some of the smaller air shows that are out there too. Now, if you've got a local airfield near you, the likelihood is at some point during the year, they're either going to have an air show itself or at very least an open day. And those are great opportunities for you to take the kids down to get up and close to the aircraft. Have a look at local airfields in your area, have a look at their social media channels, jump on their website and see what they're doing in terms of public outreach to try and get more people coming to their airfields. There are some airports here in Victoria, for example. Taiab is a great example of one which has an area out the front, quite close to the runway actually, where you can sit outside if it's a nice day for maybe even just half an hour, just watch some of the aircraft movements in front of you. It's like a little mini free air show for the cost of a coffee for you and maybe an ice cream for the kids. This isn't about criticising big air shows. I'm not here to point fingers, and I've mentioned a few air shows only to give some context and some examples. But I am very protective of this industry that I care about deeply, and I want to make sure that as a community and as an industry as a whole, we continue to make sure that aviation is accessible to the many and not just to the few. But let me know your thoughts on air shows, big or small. I'd love to hear your opinion as well. I'll see you down in the comments.